So I'll tell you where we are. We are on Tzadi Zayin Amud Bet, and we're really two lines on the bottom, two lines from the bottom. There's two dots there, and it's just kind of like a wrap up to pretty much the stuff before. There were a number of unusual cases. You threw from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, Rosh Hashanah in the middle, Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, Rosh Hashanah on one side. So there's one more case the Gemara is going to talk about, and then the Gemara is going to talk about a Rosh Hashanah Makora, which is really going to lead us into a long discussion about the wagons of the Mishkan, and then we'll talk about the Krushim of the Mishkan, and we'll talk about as well the coverings on top of the Mishkan. That's really going to be a whole piece. It's going to take us on Tzadi Chet and half of Tzadi Tet and Aleph. So let's just do this first piece of Gemara, and then we can put that away, so to speak, and concentrate on the Agalot. Here's the case. Hazorek Reshut Harabim Reshut Harabim Reshut Hayachid B'Emsav. You're throwing. Once again, all these cases are examples of Zorek. We've all seen they're not carrying, but you're throwing from Reshut Harabim to Reshut Harabim. Reshut Hayachid is in the middle, and you're throwing Dal Ramos. So Rashi explains that the case is here. I'm sorry. So Rashi explains the situation we're talking about is I threw from Rosh Hashanah to another Rosh Hashanah in the middle of the Rosh Hashanah. However, we said that what's the big deal? We've had these cases. The knight here is the fact that each Rosh Hashanah was not 4 amos long. I threw a total of 4 amos. Hold on to the pictures. We're not up to them yet. I'm just coming attractions. So you threw, let's say there was a Rosh Hashanah that was 2 amos, and then you had a Rosh Hashanah, and then you had a Rosh Hashanah of 2 amos. So the chiddush of this brisa, according to this brisa, if you threw a total of 4 amos in Rosh Hashanah, even though it was divided between 2 parts of Rosh Hashanah, which were divided from each other by a Rosh Hashanah, nonetheless they're going to be combined. That's a new twist that we didn't have before. So in other words, you could have thought maybe each Rosh Hashanah needs 4 amos to travel across, and you can't divide it. No, says this right, so you could. Yes?
No, you said 2 plus 2.
2 plus 2, but even though the 2 plus 2 are not really are not connected, are not contiguous. Mm-hmm. Now, there's no such thing as, there can be different Rosh Hashanah owned by different people, but you can't have different Rosh Hashanah owned by different people. Rosh Hashanah, by definition, is public. So whether it's public and it's on the it's on the Thornhill side of Vaughan, or whether it's on public and it's on the Markham side of Vaughan, it's still Rosh Hashanah. It's all one big Rosh Hashanah. So that's the Gemara's Chiddush. The Gemara's Chiddush is when you combine the 2 Rosh Hashanah, the total was 4 amos, you're chayev, unless you're not going to be chayev. Pachos me'arba amos, you're going to be parter. Why? So what do you mean you're going to be parter? So the Gemara is going to explain what the chiddush is, but one chiddush here is that we don't say that it flew over Rosh Hayachid, and therefore you considered it kluta k'mishuncha. Anybody remember this term kluta k'mishuncha? We said it's going to come back a number of times to haunt us. You don't say, according to the author of this brisa, you're not going to say kluta. You're not going to follow the opinion kluta k'mishuncha. So otherwise, if you said kluta k'mishuncha, when it went from Rosh Hashanah into Rosh Hayachid, you'd say it stopped. And therefore, you may not be chayiv for havara, but you'd be chayiv for hachnasa, or bringing in. And then when it starts again, you'd be chayiv for taking it out. You'd be chayiv 1 or 2, depending on whether you have a maximum of 39 malachas or not a maximum, whether you chayiv a tolda with a nav or not. But in other words, according to everything in this brisa, we're going to say kluta lav k'mishun chadami, and that's the Gemara simply says, "My kamash malan." What's the chiddush of saying this? The kamash malan. So kamash malan reshuyot mitzdarfos. That 2 reshuyos, 2 equal reshuyos can be combined. 2 reshus rabims can be combined. And udlo amrinan kluta k'mishun. We don't say that you're going to say when it's flying in the air over reshus hayachid, you're going to say that it's stopgap and it stopped for a moment. That's the chiddush of that. So this is just like the last of a whole bunch of series of different cases that come up. And then there's one more, and that's the case we're going to have about the Rosh Hashanah Makora. Okay? So I don't want to spend too much time because we're going to need the time here for this next piece of the Gemara here. Amar Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda. Amar Rav Abba Amar Rav Rakuna. Amar Rav. Okay, so all these people said in the name of Rav. Hamaver dal ramos b'Rosh Hashanah Makora pater. If you carry It's not about throwing here. Once again, you're carrying in a Rishus Harabim that is covered, a covered Rishus Harabim. I don't know of an example of a covered Rishus Harabim, unless we probably can think of one. I don't know. Maybe a big tunnel on the highway. A tunnel on the highway could be Rishus Harabim Makora. Because if it's a highway and a straight highway, it's a highway from town to town, that's going to be clearly Rishus Harabim. So a bridge should be, it could be a bridge. A bridge has a roof on it. A bridge is covered bridge, or even a bridge, depending on how the girders are set up. Probably not a bridge as much as more of a tunnel. Okay. Or think of maybe a big, a big area that has a cover on top of it. I'm trying to think of an example. I don't know, like a big stadium where people can run around. But I don't know of any stadium where people run around that way. I don't know. In Australia, I know they have a rule that all the playgrounds are covered. That's because of the ozone layer is very thin, and all the rays that come down from the sun are detrimental to everyone.
Israel, they have the same thing.
Right.
Playgrounds, they have like a top.
Right, correct. Well, if you say the Rishus, the question is the Rishus, is it a playground or Rishus Harabim? Maybe more of a Carmelist, because it's not really large enough for that number of people. It's not really straight going. I'm thinking maybe a tunnel. A tunnel would be a good example. So it's a real Rishus Harabim. Tunnel on any highway is going to be a Rishus Harabim. But it is Rishus Harabim Makora. So the rule that's being stated here is a Rishus Harabim that's covered is going to be pater. Now, why not? Why would it be pater? So the Gemara explains right away what the issue is, what the deficiency is. Lefisha eino doma ledigle midbar, because in the midbar there was no covered Rishus Harabim. Okay, that's the rule. Anything now. These rules sometimes seem somewhat subjective and somewhat selective, I should say. But the reality is there was no covered Rishus Harabim in the wilderness. Rishus Harabim by definition was wide open. Where was the Rishus Harabim? The Midbar. Wherever they went, that was the Rishus Harabim. When the Bnei Yisrael were no longer there, the Midbar today is not considered Rishus Harabim. I forget whether the Gemara discusses that. It's only when Bnei Yisrael were going through. But they made their own roads, they made their own highways, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Al Pi Hashem Yachnuv, Al Pi Hashem Yisou. That was Rishus Harabim. There was never a situation where they went through a tunnel. Okay? There's one case that comes up when they're fighting one of the A nations, where the mountains close up on the enemy. Remember that story? Okay, but there's no real tunnel per se being developed in the Midbar. So as a result, if the Midbar, or if the laws of Rishus Harabim come out from the Digla Midbar, from the way they traveled, and they do, so then it's going to seem to make sense. It will follow the template of what the Rishus Harabim in the Midbar actually looked like. So, in fact, if you think about it for a moment, it actually makes a lot of sense. How do we know what Rishus Harabim is? So, what makes Rishus Harabim? You have to have 600 people going through it. Well, that's because of Bnei Yisrael, or at least Bnei Yisrael males that were counted. You have to have, it's got to be straight. Why? Because in the Midbar, the roads went straight. There were no curved roads. It was wide open. It has to be 16 amos across. And the Gemara will actually discuss that in discussing the wagons, how wide the wagons were, and that you needed an extra am on each side. So the wagons, actually the two wagons that are transporting the krushim, is a total of 15. And then you needed one am on the side, because there was a Levi running around on each side, almost like a skinny kind of Levi. Probably only needed a half am on either side. And his job was to kind of make sure the boards didn't fall off. So you need a little bit of space on either side to make sure that was okay. So that's where the rule comes from, why you need 16 amos for Rishus Harabim. If you have a narrow place, you wouldn't have 16 amos, it would not be Rishus Harabim. So all the laws make sense, so therefore it makes sense that if you never had a Rishus Harabim Makora in the Midbar, that's not going to be considered Rishus Harabim, or it would be considered a deficient Rishus Harabim, and would not be chayev min haTorah for carrying through that in Rishus Harabim today. So that's the basic rule. The Gemara does not dispute the rule. The Gemara's only discussion now is about what happened. You're telling me that there is no Rishus Harabim possibility in the Midbar that had a roof on top of it. So the Gemara's major discussion now is going to talk about the agalos that the Levium carry the krushim on there, because the Gemara is going to work with a premise that the agalos had a floor, like any wagons you'd have. Think of your flexible flyer wagons or your or your covered trucks, your flatbed trucks have some kind of base on it. So therefore, and the Gemara is going to say that underneath the sides of the agalos and between the agalos and underneath the agalos is going to be considered Rishus Harabim. So the obvious question that's going to come up, the Gemara will have to probe, is wasn't there roofing or wasn't there a covering over on the bottom of the wagons that they would be carrying under would be considered Rishus Harabim, and if so, you see as a Rishus Harabim, Makora is considered Rishus Harabim. So that's really the way we get into this whole discussion about the agalos. It's fundamental because it tells us how wide the Rishus Harabim is, but also helps us understand what the agalos were. And the upshot, by the way, the discussion will be that the agalos were not solid. In fact, if you have the picture, this is what the agalos is actually going to look like. Right, when we come to the final discussion, but right now the Gemara assumes that's not the case. The Gemara assumes that there was a flat bottom underneath the agalos, which would have made some kind of covering, and underneath would have been Rishus Harabim Makora. So that's really the whole reason we go into this. But this is the one place we really find a discussion what the actual agalos really looked like and how they functioned, how they went in the midbar. Okay, we're going to follow basically Rashi's interpretation. There's a number of Tosfos in where Tosfos disagrees with some of the details on how these boards were actually put together and how they were set up. So the Gemara's question is V'agalos the Makoros Havin. But what about the agalos of the Mishkan that they carried the krushim? And the Gemara is going to assume first of all there was a flat bottom. And on top of it, the Gemara is going to assume that when they put the boards on top of the wagon, the boards would be covering the wagon. Marvin, can you close the door just a minute? Thank you. Okay. So in other words, the Gemara will assume that the boards themselves cause some kind of covering on top of the wagons. So even if you don't have this covering on the bottom here, so this would be covered. So underneath it, if you would carry underneath it, walk under the wagons, it would be like under a Rishus Harabim Makora, because we will see that the Gemara assumes that what's under the wagons was considered Rishus Harabim. We'll see that in a couple of minutes. So that's why we go into the whole discussion here. So the Gemara says. So where are we up to? V'amarav mishum Rav Mechia agalos. I'll go back a step. Agalos the makoros havoin, but the agalos that carry the krushim weren't they covered? Not covered like covered wagons. Don't think of Conestoga wagons being covered. Just think of flatbed trailers being flat, or think of something on a flatbed trailer that's going to obscure underneath what's underneath it. So that there will be a covering over the ground when the wagon goes by, when the tractor trailer goes by. V'yomarav mishum Rabbi Chia agalos tachtehem beinehem v'tzidehem Rishus Harabim. So we have this rule. You could say, well, you disagree with it, but you see the Gemara assumes this to be true. They had a tradition, or they had a belief, or they accepted that the agalos underneath them and was considered Rishus Harabim, Beinehem between them, and Sidehem were considered Rishus Harabim. Here's our first chart. Look at the first chart up on the top one. If you have the article, you see the chart there. You need to know what it means, Beinehem, Tachtehem, and Sidehem. So these are the wagons. This is a bird's eye view. This is the chart on the left side. Yes? You have one of these? No, I'm sorry. Okay, here you go. Okay. So the chart on the top of the left side on the first page that you have, gotta make sure I got my rights and lefts together, has two wagons that that Levium were transporting the krushim. There were two next to each other. There was actually two, and then another two that went behind them. So it was a total of 4 agalos that traveled in the midbar. They went in this kind of formation. That's the simplest way to understand what's going on. Tosfos has a bit of a knech. Tosfos actually believes that the wagons were actually connected together. We're not going to get into that, but Tosfos really sees that there's some kind of board to give them stability. But the formation is really the same. And if you look here, the print's a little small. Tachteim is obviously underneath the wagon itself. The tzidehem is on their side of them, which is really going to be where the wheels are. Those are bird's eye view of the wheels. And then you have beineim, you have a space between the agalot. Okay, so the agalot, just that you get the dimensions here, because it's sometimes hard to imagine how narrow these wagons actually are. I'm sorry?
Very narrow. What are these half circle things here?
That's wheels. Which ones?
No, the wheels.
Oh, the other ones I don't know what those are. They're clips actually. I'll tell you what they are. We're not up to that chart yet.
Okay.
That's the clips. That's not the clips. That's the rings that held them on.
Yeah, okay, got you.
Okay, so let's try to do things in order. Otherwise, we'll get so confused. We won't be able to get through this. But look at the left one. Left one, you have two wagons, and each wagon is really 2.5 amos wide. So how much is an amo? Let's say 2 feet. So how wide would be the wagon?
Wide.
2.5 times 2, 5 feet across.
4.5.
Okay, how tall are the crushim, by the way?
10 amos.
10 amos. Okay? The crushim are these boards that they use for the Mishkan. That's the picture over here. These long boards. And from the height is 10 amos high. So actually that's why there's space between the wagons, because the boards hung out over the side of the wagons. So you got 2.5 in the middle, which is actually the wagon itself. You've got the fatness of the wheels and the axles. Add another 1.25 amos on either side, and then you have between the wagons you have 2.5. So that a total from one end to one end. Each wagon should be a total of. Let's see. Does this make sense? I guess there's going to be some space between the two of them. 2.5 and 2.5 and 2.5 is 7.5. 7.5 and another 2.5 is going to make it 10. It's going to make a total of 10, right? So there's really just almost. It's going to be fill up. Yes, it's going to be 10 and 10. So you've got crushing almost bouncing against each other.
Where are the dimensions of the wagons?
The Gemara.
It's a Gemara. It's not a phone.
It's not anywhere in the Torah.
Okay,
The Gemara has this Masorah. In fact, the Gemara will actually ask the question as we go through. How do we know that why they need 2.5 amos wide? Why couldn't they get away with a wagon that was 1.25 amos wide?
You can't even get away with 2.5 amos.
Well,
in my opinion, because the center of gravity is to the right.
Why would the center?
You have the boards, right? You have the
Yes,
boards.
correct.
And then you have the cutout pieces. So even if you don't have the cutout pieces, the center of gravity is in the center of the boards, which is off-centered because you got this piece here. The center of gravity is somewhere over here.
So I'm not quite okay.
Like you take off the hollow part, the part on the end.
Yeah.
Right. So center of
You've
gravity.
challenged the center of gravity a bit. Yes.
You move it over to the left, right?
Yes, a
so
little
it's
bit.
close to the edge. So
Okay, maybe.
So either the drawing's wrong and they would move it over a little. Like if I was moving it on this wagon, I would move it over so it would be. Otherwise,
I don't know. So it's not.
This is pre-Newton.
No.
Right.
But, no, what you're saying is the weight's wrong.
Well, here, more importantly, if you and I were doing this,
You do it the other way.
we do it the long way,
Yeah.
right? But that's not how they did it.
'Cause
I can't tell you
it's
why
too,
they did or why they didn't do it, but this is how they actually laid them up. And you've got to remember
It's not stable. That's what
the funny thing about it. I'll say funny. The unusual thing about the way the agalos were lined up. Once again, I told you had two agalos back to back. You had. Where's a good example? The two agalos here in this first picture. You had two, and then you had two behind them. When they loaded them up, they loaded up one, and they moved to the first one. They moved up back one and moved to the first one. So if you were carrying it, you'd probably be carrying it straight on. Not quite clear how they carried these things, but they would have to twist them to make sure they were there.
Okay, it's a
Okay.
comment. It's a comment. Take it
Okay,
or leave it.
I can only tell you the Gemara will discuss the fact that there was a Levi that walked alongside of them, and his job was to make sure that these things didn't fall off. Okay,
But I'm just saying it
I
doesn't.
don't know what to say. They're
I'm just,
heavy.
no, I'm just saying. It's not necessarily in the middle. They could have put a little bit off center.
Possibly.
Well, it doesn't.
Well, they
why
didn't have
does it
to put
be
all.
in the middle because in the center. You know what I'm
Okay,
saying?
you're right. They could have put off center.
They're off
That's
center
right.
a little bit. That's
Right. If they both were off center, it would fit just as well.
Yeah, and they would this way stay. The weight the center is on the middle of the wagon.
Right. I agree.
It's
Okay.
not
There, so it's going to work out. Okay.
stable. Okay.
It's stabilized. But that's how the agalos worked, and it was obviously a slow, laborious process moving these agalos. They're not streamlined for speed, right? It seems it's going to be moving very slowly because you've got these heavy boards on top of these wagons. They're being pulled by, I guess, oxen, and you don't have and I understand you've got the anana kavod, which is smoothing out all the bumps. So it's going to be what is called air cushion ride. They see all the advertisements on all the moving vans. But at the same time, this has got to be somewhere going up and down, and I'm not sure how it worked then.
Not to
But-
mention anything, you're traveling on sand.
You're not traveling on sand. You're not traveling on sand. Midbar Sinai is not sand. It's rocks. Don't think Sahara Desert. It's not the Sahara Desert at all. It's a very rocky, desolate place, but it's not sandy.
So if it's rocky, it's bumpy.
Right, that's what I said.
You
It's bumpy.
You said
they
it's
can't-
smoothed out by
smoothed
I said the Anan HaKavod, the cloud of glory, smoothed out all the rocks. So this was like, think of setting a road grader in front of you as you walk down the parade. In other words, before you came along, there's somehow the paving company travels ahead of you to smooth down all the pieces. They're not throwing down the asphalt; they're simply just smoothing down. The road grader is there, or the road roller is there, and it smooths down the hard packed soil. Okay, that's how it went. Okay, that's all I can say. No one's here to kind of say we're doing the wrong thing. But this is clearly some of the numbers that the Gemara works with. You have to understand, you have to realize that we're going to accept these numbers. There is no raya, there's no Torah, there's no drushes for this. The Torah does not even tell us about this. You assume that there is some kind of agalot. We associate these with agalot that the Nesiim gave, that were later used to transport the Krashim. I believe these are agalot that were used to transport the Krashim. And then this is how they were set up. But it's important, by the way. Here's how important it is. Let's go back to this first picture. This across is going to be 15. No, not exactly.
20.
No, this is going to be 20. But if you take the 2.5 and the 2.5 off, right? If you have to take the 2, that's going to give us 5. Going to make it down to 15.
Why do you take the 2.5 off?
Because it's not really transporting. It's above the actual Shus Harabim. That's how the Gemara is going to understand this. Let me see if I can figure this out. Let me just do this again quickly. 2.5, and 2.5 is 7.5, 7.5, another 2.5 is 10.
Because the wagon.
Right, so the wagon, no, the actual traveling of the wagon, the actual travel space of the wagon is really from one wheel on the one side to the other wheel of the other side of the second wagon. It's going to be a total of 15 amos. And you have to assume that somehow in between this was this Levi who needed some amma to run around. I'm not quite sure how he was snuck underneath the boards.
He was between the boards here.
Or maybe he was between the boards.
Between the boards.
Possibly between the boards. Maybe that was it.
Between the boards. Not here. The wagon's here, but between the boards.
Okay, he's between the boards.
Here, crushed, man. But,
okay? Possibly, yeah.
I'm just saying, if you're going to put it there.
Right. This is the easy part about trying to understand the wagons. Okay, so but you'll see it gets a little more complex in terms of making it understand. The bottom line is these are the wagons. Okay, take them or leave them. This is how they were. Not covered wagons; they're flat wagons, two and two, and they traveled slowly. And you have some. You're going to put the Krashim across them, as you see. The next couple of pictures give you variations how the Krashim work, but it gives you a general sense of actually the Krashim were sideways, lying across widthwise on the wagons.
A lot of wagons, though.
You have 4 wagons. You have 4 wagons.
For all the boards?
Yeah, they were not. They were piled up. They were stacked.
Oh.
I'm telling you, these are very heavy machinery. You could be stacking up three stacks each of the different krashim.
Yeah, because it's 10 amos, but 1.5 amos by 1 amo.
Right, there's a lot of krashim. So you're going to have, as you'll see, when we'll get to the variations, you're going to have either 3 or 4 piles of these boards. This is just really the easiest part about being off center. Just imagining this weight that's moving around that may start to shift, and how one Levi who's running alongside is going to be able to. Hopefully, he doesn't get crushed.
No, he's running in between them.
Right? How he has to run. Oh yeah. Ooh. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Here we go. So let's go back here. So then we said that underneath them and next to them and between them and next to them, which is where the wheels are, is considered Rishus Harabim. So that's what the Gemara feels is the Krashim. And the Gemara says, so how is it possible that you never had a Rishus Harabim Makora underneath, because you have underneath the Krashim, you have where the Krashim actually were lying across them. So the Gemara says, Kikama Rav Bidrasa. So the way Rav interprets this, it means the Drasa Rashi says is the place between the different rows of the Krashim on the Krashim. So they were set a pile of Krashim, and then there's a space between them, and they put another pile of Krashim, space, another pile of Krashim, and so forth. So I'm not sure which of these pictures actually fits into that. This actually, I see I did them out of order. This is the one below on the bottom left, I believe is the next picture. Am I right?
This one is the next picture.
Yeah, this one, the bottom left. Okay, sorry, I slipped out of order here. So the one on the bottom left is, in other words, that they were not stacked next to each other tight, because if they were tight, then you'd really have Makora completely. but you had some kind of spacing between all the different krushim as they were set up. I'm not sure why this makes it better or worse, or why it makes it better for transporting. We'll see in a moment how the Gemara adjusts this, but this is what the Gemara assumes, and therefore it is possible that there was some space underneath these krushim that therefore was covered, but it means that in between this krushim there were different spaces that were considered uncovered. So you really didn't have a covered kind of area that was excluded from Rishus Harabim. There was still underneath it, you can read that underneath the Agalot was still in areas that were considered Rishus Harabim that were not Makora. Okay? So let's go back again. So V'yamar Kikam Rav B'drasa. So the Gemara says, now let's go try to figure this out, says the Gemara. Do you remember the rule we have about lavud? We learned the rule. 3 tfachim are considered gapped up. It's gapped up vertically, it can also be gapped up horizontally. So the Gemara says, now let's just, by the way, figure out how many tfachim in a amma.
How many? 7?
Well, 5 or 6.
6.
5 or 6. It's actually 5 or 6. 5 or 6. Okay. So 4.5. 4 inches to a tefach. 4 inches to a tefach, and therefore, if you have 5 tefachim, it's going to make it 20 inches. If you have 6 tefachim, it's going to make it 24 inches. There's a discussion where different types of amos used were different, equal to either 5 or 6 tefachim. But the bottom line is between each amma would be considered 6 tefachim. If you had an amma between each pile, each stack of krushim, then you had an amma, then they would not be gapped up to be too big for lavud. Lavud only goes as far as 3 tefachim. Okay, so if you had an amma space, you would not be able to say that's going to be equal to lavud. So the Gemara tries to figure out how this could be. And the Gemara initially thinks that even if you had spaces between them, they would be small enough that they would become gapped up. So says the Gemara like this: Mechdei orko de agala kame havoi. How long was the wagon? What was the length of the wagon? So the Gemara says there were 5 amos long. How do we know this? The Gemara assumes it. Okay, the Gemara actually will ask, I think either the Gemara asks or Tosfos asks, why do we need 5? Why couldn't we get away with 4? And I forgot the answer. But the Gemara has this tradition that they were 5 amos long. So they were 5 amos long. So Putaya de Keresh Kama Havoi. So how wide was the area of how wide or thick maybe was the area of the keresh? So amo v'palga. So it was 1.5 amos thick. In other words, the krushim were 10 amos high. They were 1 amma by 1.5 amos. Who remembers which side is which?
The depth was 1.
The depth was 1. The width was 1.5.
Yeah, I know that. So yeah.
Okay.
I believe so.
Maybe. Okay.
Oh, it shows here. 1.5 is the width.
So 1.5 is the width, but I'm sure which is the width, which is the depth.
The Chumash, I know the Chumash doesn't give a depth.
Well, this is what the Gemara feels. It was 1.5 by 1.5 by 1.
But the Chumash doesn't say 1. I think it just assumes it's 1.
Maybe. So the Gemara feels, once again, these are traditions that the Gemara kind of works with, which you have to accept.
Yeah, fine.
So the Gemara says, okay, so how much is going to be each keresh across? 1.5. So the Gemara says, so how many, if you got a 5 amma kind of wagon, we're still really with the picture on the bottom left. If you have a 5 amma wagon, so how many piles of krushim can you have? Kama musiv, how much can you put up for 1.5 times really into 5 amos? Gemara is going to say talsa, 3 of them are tilsa. 3, you can have 3 stacks of krushim that are 1.5 thickness across. Makes sense? So Gemara says, if that's the case, and you're telling me that the spaces between the different krushim, pashule palga diamta. So that means that you have 1 amma extra. You've got 3 krushim, 3 piles of krushim that are 1.5, 1.5, 1.5 makes 4.5. It's in a space of 5 amos, which means you have a total of 1/2 amma extra. Between each pile of krushim, you're going to have 1/4 of an amma, 1/4 of an amma. The math is very simple. It's more harder to understand how this thing rolls. But the actual numbers add up. The Gemara's obvious question is going to be, if I only have 1/4 of an amma between each of these piles, it's considered lavud. If it's considered lavud, then even though I have a space underneath the wagons, the space doesn't exist. The space has been gapped up by lavud, because a quarter of a amma is going to be how much? So an amma we said is going to be 5 or 6 tvachim. 1/4 is going to be 1.5 to 2 tvachim. So clearly, it's less than 3 tvachim. It's going to gap up. Okay, so the Gemara initially says that can't be, because if that's the way it was lying, then you'd have no space whatsoever, and you're back to having a Rishus Harabim Makora, because the Gemara worked with the assumption that underneath Tachteim is considered Rishus Harabim, and Tachteim underneath the Gagalos was considered covered. Any questions so far? It's pretty straight once you can make sense of the pictures. That's why you need the picture. So the Gemara says, Kishadimar. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped the line. So the Gemara says, Kama Musif Talsa, so partially Palgo the Alma. So the Gemara says, Kishadile Mar, Beini Ubeini, Kilavadami. So the place between them was going to be considered lavud. So the Gemara says, wait, Misavris Kwashim Aputayo Have Manachle, Achoron Manachlahu. In other words, they couldn't be placed on the side that was 1.5 tfachim across, because there were, underneath these boards, there were the rings that the briach went through. So the krashim were set up in a way, I don't know if we have a picture of this later on.
You talking about these rings here?
These rings here, correct. So the krashim are made, and they're boxed off, and on one side you have a ring that you have a briach going through this, so you couldn't put them on that side. You couldn't lie them down. They're not going to sit.
And what's the purpose of this?
Briach was there was a pole that went through them to keep them from moving around. They kept them together when you inserted them.
Didn't go through the middle?
You also had a briach hatichon, which was with a mace, according to the miracle, that it went all the way around by itself in the middle. Briach hatichon. Somehow you put it on one end and it managed to curve around and come out the other end. Actually, according to our Gemara, other Medrashim disagree with that. So let's just deal first with the regular krashim. You had poles that were put through it that ensured that it would not come apart, and each of these big boards would stay vertical and stay connected to the next one and be tight. So as a result, if on the bottom of this beriach you had rings sticking out, let's say the rings sticking out here, you couldn't really put rings against the next keresh. It would dent it. It wouldn't stay. You couldn't put ring against ring because it would slide off. So the Gemara says you have to put them on the other side. So therefore, you're worried about the fact that you have 1.5. Well, I guess this way it's 1.5. When it sits down, it's going to be too wide. No, you couldn't, because the rings were here. So it must be you had to put them this way, and therefore this way is only going to be one amma across. So the Gemara says now.
Then you can't put the ones on top.
I'm sorry?
Sorry, I'm mixed up. Sorry.
You have,
I'm mixed up. I'm sorry.
Okay? So the Gemara says, Kama Mosiv Tlasa. So how much are you going to have left when you kind of do it this way? Kish Adimar Beini Beini Kalavadam. So the Gemara says, Misavas Krashim Apurtaya Kave Manachlo, Achudan Manachlahu. So we're going to put it on the shorter end. They're going to pile them up one. So Gemara says, Sum could the keresh kamavoy. How wide is the thinner end, the thinner side of the keresh? Amma. It's going to be 1 amma. So it's not going to be 1.5 amot. It's going to be 1 amma. So Gemara says, Kama have musif. So if you have a wagon that's 5 amos long, and you have piles of krashim that are 1 amma wide, and you pile them up. So how many piles can you put onto a 5 keresh wagon? A 5 amma wagon? 4 piles. So you have 4 piles of krashim. You have 1 amma that's going to be divided 3 ways. Not 1.5 being divided 2 ways, but 1 amma divided 3 ways, which will give you 1 extra amma that you have to divide 3 ways, which means that each space between each of the krashim is going to be 1/3 of an amma. How much is an amma? We said 5 tvachim or 6 tvachim. 1/3 of an amma is either going to be 1/3 of an amma will be how many? 1.5 to 2 tvachim still. So it's still going to be under 3 tvachim. So even if I'm not using the 1.5 amma side, I'm using 1 amma sides, I'll have an extra pile of krashim, and I'll be dividing that extra amma into 3 different divisions. So it still will be considered lavud. Kama have mosiv arba pashla amta. So I'll take off 1 amma for space between them. Kishad lemar beini lebeini kilavudami. So when I'll have the space between these 4 different piles of krashim, we don't exactly have a picture in these diagrams here for this. I will have 1 amma that I'll divide 3 ways. and therefore it'll be considered love. It'll be considered love, and it'll be completely gapped up. Okay? So that's what the Gemara says, and so the Gemara says, the Gemara actually, before they come to the next interpretation of how we're going to make it work, the Gemara is going to say, and I think this is going to take us to the picture on the top right. Because the Gemara says, but wait, let's just see actually how were these krashim built. So there's a machlokas in the Gemara how the krashim were built. Were the krashim built like we always think of them as boards that were straight up, or were the krashim tapered towards the top? Okay, and this is actually a very large discussion how they were tapered. In the picture of Mr. Archgold, they're tapered like Rashi thought they're tapered. They go to a point. Some of the Rishonim seem this is the way they were tapered. If you look, they're lying flat. Some Rishonim say that the tapering was more of like a tower, straight, and at the very end they came to a point. But Rashi's pshat is simplest pshat, because what it means is, you're telling me the problem really would be the fact that you didn't have enough space between each of the piles because it'd be considered lavud, but if they tapered one end, on this side you've got more space. So lavud is not going to gap up this end of the krashim.
You could have flipped them.
You could have flipped. Well, you can't flip them. No, Tosa says you can't, it's not covered.
No, I know, but if you want to use space, you'd alternate.
Correct. Tosa suggests that. Tosa says you can't do that because it's not covered to put a top next to a bottom. They were very careful about covered for the parts of the Mishkan. Okay, apparently, and not only that, according to Tosa Rishonim, even when they lined up the Krashim, they had to be careful. The ones that were closer to the Aron Kodesh had to stay there. In other words, the order remained itself. You couldn't take Keresh 40 and make it into where Keresh 20 was. So there's an idea here of Kedusha that goes even to the Keresh itself. So the Gemara says, "Hani lechaman deyamar krashim milamata ovyon amo milamal and kolim v'holchim." So the Gemara says, "Well, you know what? According to what you told me that you think there's a problem in Lovewood, that's going to be a problem. That's not going to be a problem if it comes to a point. Ad ke'etzba, that kolim v'holchim ad ke'etzba shaper. So if you think it comes to a point, then you won't have a problem of Lovewood. Elaman deyamar kashem shalamata ovyon amo kach milamalyon ovon amo Michael Meimer. But according to the other opinion, which is the opinion of how we normally view the krashim, they're going to be the same width on the top and on the bottom. They're straight up and down. Just think of these as straight 2x4s, or in this case, 1.5 amo by 1 amo by 10 amos high.
It's a big lumber.
It's a big piece of lumber. It's a big piece of lumber, correct. And actually, according to the Gemara, this piece of lumber had to be one piece of lumber. One piece. The Gemara will come to it at the end of the sugi. You couldn't take different bits and pieces and kind of weave them together or put kind of sockets together. They had to be one from one tree. Okay, big trees, 10 amos high.
Because Rashi's thing, you could have to wait. I don't have half, but you get like half.
Correct. This at any rate, just keep in mind. For now, we're going to leave this concept of these krashim that come to a point. The Gemara will revisit them later in terms of how the krashim were put together. But there's a machlokas on the krashim coming to a point, the skinny points on top, which means when you put it, the krashim are set up. In this case, they're coming like this. Think of these as angled, right? According to the way we normally think of them, there's one keresh, one keresh, one keresh. It's lumber after lumber after lumber after lumber. So if you say that they were pointed, then there's no problem. You understand that you have an open space, and therefore it's not going to be considered lavud. That's good. But according to the other opinion, that they're straight up, that clearly you should have a problem with lavud, should gap it up completely, and therefore underneath it should be considered a rishus arav makora. So whether you're going to be 1.5, 3 piles of 1.5 amos thick, or whether it's 4 piles of 1 amo on the skinny side, which makes sense. So then still you're going to have a problem of having lavud between the two of them. So the Gemara comes to the final answer. So what does the Gemara say? Amrav kahana biad boy. So advoy is a long discussion in Rashi what advoy means. But advoy means that there's a space between the actual krashim. They didn't just simply have loose piles and space between them. They took 2 piles of krashim and put them together. This, by the way, makes a lot of sense in terms of weight distribution. This is the picture that you have in the middle of the top. Okay, this is what the Gemara is assuming. So that you have krashim, 2 piles of krashim stuck together, 2 piles of krashim stuck together, and in between the 2 piles of krashim, you have a full amma that's between them. An amma is going to be 5 or 6 tfachim. That's going to be too big to be considered lavud. So you did not divide them up, spread them around either this way or spread them around this way. or any other way, but simply you put the two piles together. Makes sense to me because you're assuming the weight would lean one onto the other. And in this picture, on the middle top, once again, I'm sorry I put them a little bit out of order, but in the picture, on the middle of the top, you'll notice those circles, that's what Archie asked before, those circles are the rings in which they put together the briach, the poles that would keep them together. So that's what the picture is. As a result, in this kind of scenario, which is how the Gemara feels the wagons were actually set up, you no longer have a completely covered situation that the krashim are covering the entire wagon. As a result, the statement of Rav earlier on in the Gemara, Rav in the name of Rav Chia, that said the agalot underneath them, on the side of them, between them, and underneath them were considered a Rishus Harabim, does not necessarily negate that there was a Rishus Harabim Makora that's a Rishus Harabim. Because what we're assuming now, that in between these two piles of krashim was an open space, underneath this would be considered Rishus Harabim. Now, underneath the two different piles of krashim, that wouldn't be considered Rishus Harabim. I guess then you say, well, you see that there is a Rishus Harabim Makora, so what we're saying, no, we're saying that that's not a Rishus Harabim. That even on the wagons that had some covering, there was still something that was open, that you could define the wagons as having underneath them a Rishus Harabim. Okay, it doesn't mean there was no coverings in the midbar. It means that there was no coverings in the midbar that were Rishus Harabim. In other words, let me say, when they carried the menorah, when they carried the aron, underneath the aron was covered, but it was not considered Rishus Harabim. What makes the wagons problematic is the statement of Rav in the name of Rav Chia to say that underneath the wagons was a Rishus Harabim. So we have to find that how, because if you had a covered wagon, you could say it was a Rishus HaYachid underneath it. But Rav in the name of Rav Chia said that underneath the wagons was a Rishus Harabim. So the only way, and you're telling me now that a Rishus Harabim Makora is not a Rishus Harabim, so I have to find some place underneath the wagons that it was not Makora for me to accept Rav in the name of Rav Chia's statement that under the wagons was considered a Rishus Harabim, and it's not covered, because if it is covered, it's not Rishus Harabim. Did people follow what I said? I didn't say there's nothing that was covered. But if we assume that anything that's covered is not a Rishus Harabim, it's not a problem. What makes this all the challenge for the Gemara is because the assumption is that underneath the wagons was considered Rishus Harabim. Something under the wagons was Rishus Harabim.
The outside was Rishus Harabim. Outside was.
Of course, the outside was Rishus Harabim. Between the wagons was Rishus Harabim too.
Right.
But the issue is that if you go back to this Gemara, you go back to the Gemara on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 line, 2, 4, 6 in the 7th lines, that it says, V'agalos, the Makoros Havoin, the Agalos were covered. The Amarav Mishum Rabbi Chia in the 7th line, Agalot, Tachtem, Uveneim, V'sidem, Rishus Harabim. So in the statement of Rav in the name of Rav Chia, you see two things. One is that underneath the wagons was considered Rishus Harabim, and we know that the wagons were covered because there were some kind of boards on top. So you have to come up with some kind of scenario that the boards are on top of the wagons, they're covering the ground, and yet there's still a Rishus Harabim underneath the wagons, which is what's coming up at this point.
Why would it? Okay, let me say something. Why would it change? If everything was Rishus Harabim, why would the area under the wagons not be? Because the whole area is Rishus Harabim.
Because it's blocked. Because you can't have Rishus Harabim that's covered. Because the Rishus Harabim that's covered is not a Rishus Harabim. So the moment I cover some, in other words, I have a highway and it goes under a tunnel, it goes under an overpass. Let's just say that may not be true. Let's say it goes under an overpass. Right. So the highway is Rishus Harabim, but then where it goes under the underpass is considered Rishus Harabim Makora.
Oh, okay.
So maybe for that area, when I go in the tunnel or go into the underpass, that would not be considered Rishus Harabim in a Torah. Maybe a Carmelis would not be Rishus Harabim. So once again, there were plenty of situations in the Midbar when they traveled that there were things that underneath them they were covered. Right, carrying the Aron would be one prime example, carrying the menorah, carrying the Mizbeach, but no one says that underneath them is Rishus Harabim. That would be considered a non-Rishus Harabim area of the wandering in the desert. That would be considered Rishus Harabim Makora, which is not considered Rishus Harabim in a Torah. What makes this problematic is we have to come up with a scenario that the wagons, A, we know cover because they're carrying krashim, and B, we need to find how it can be underneath the wagons because it says Tachteim is considered Rishus Harabim, and yet still accept the fact that Rishus Harabim Makora is not a Rishus Harabim. So this is really how it comes out in the end, how the krashim were lined up. I said from a engineering perspective, of all the difficult positions, this makes the more sense that you're lining up two together. And the atboy, really, what the word atboy, Rashi says, it's a very difficult word. Rashi says it comes from the tabas. That what you've done is you've laid up the krashim in two pairs, so the tabaot are on either side. So not that you have one, you've laid them together, back to back. You're giving them stability. The parts that stick out, the hooks that stick out or on the outside, they don't impact upon the fact that this weight on either end of the wagon is building up against itself, is positioning itself and stabilizing itself against the other wagon.
Do we know how tall these wagons were? Do we know this? Do we know that?
Maybe.
I'm just wondering if the 10 amas for the Rosh Hashanah. And we said
yes. So there.
I'm just wondering.
I think it comes up. Okay, let's wait this up very
wait
long.
till it comes up. Okay.
So at any rate, we haven't gotten to the picture yet about the agala in the bottom and the middle. What we've done so far is we've done just that we keep ourselves straight with all the pictures.
Fine.
We've done all these pictures like this. This picture we've done. So this is really what the Gemara actually concludes in terms of beliefs. This is what the krashim were carried. That's why I said of all the difficult ways that you try to make sense of this is the way that the Gemara is going to come out with it, the fact that they're sideways. Makes no sense for us. We would put them long ways. I'm not sure if we could put them long ways if we could have gotten them onto 4 agalot. That's a real question. If you put them long ways, you probably could not. Maybe that's why they ended up putting them sideways. Why could you not build more agalot? I don't know. These were the gifts of the Nesiim. They were used. They couldn't be added to.
It tells the Chumash how many there were. How many wagons there were?
There were 4.
It says in the Chumash.
There were 4 wagons, 2 and 2. I'm not quite sure why they went side by side. Why didn't they go one after the other? Why didn't they have 4 across? Why, whatever it was, but that's how the Gemara feels it traveled. And once again, this is important because it gives us the dimensions for Rosh Hashanah. So the Gemara says, so let's come to the last line. So what do we say? Michael Meimer, Rav Kahana, 2 lines at the bottom, Biad Boy. So the Adboy means they were lying out with the tabaot on the outside, the rings on the outside, that they would really lean the two piles one against each other. So the Gemara says, Adboy hechamanach lahu. Agava the agala. So where was the adboy? On the ends of the agala. This is the picture we have. So now the Gemara asks the fundamental question: Agala guf makor adboy. Wasn't the wagon itself actually a base? Didn't have a base? Didn't have a floor onto the wagon? How are you trying to tell me therefore that there was even if I have a space between the krashim? If I got a space between the krashim, this space should be on top of a board, a flatbed trailer. I don't know how flatbed trailers are made. Are they really flat? Are they really solid? I think so.
Yeah, they put stuff on top.
Right.
That's what they put.
They should be. So that we normally put stuff on top, unless it's going to be some kind of trailer that carries machinery or something like that. It should be flat and solidly flat. So the Gemara assumes the same thing was with the agalot. Right? I mean, people are no strangers to agalot in the Middle Ages. Rashi understood what agalot were, and the Gemara understood what agalot were. So the Gemara says, Amar Shmuel b'yateidos, that they actually were not considered, they were not fully solid. They were yiseidos. They were different maybe wood that went across them. This is a good picture that shows how it would be. And therefore, in between the yiseidot was open space on the wagon itself. So the wagon was an open wagon. And as a result, when you put the krashim on top of it, you'd have to say, by the way, that the krashim are really being put on top of this kind of upper thing that goes up on either side. You have the krashim going across. You have simply these things holding it, but really primarily it's open. So in between where the krashim are empty, there's going to be really empty space down to the ground floor. Okay, trust me, it works.
I know. I don't know who draws these things up because you
Art Scroll draw them up.
I know, but they're completely wrong. Like you need an axle.
You want to know something?
There's no axle. Like I'm looking, I need an axle or something. Anyway,
this is really schematics. They're schematic pictures.
Yeah,
I tried to find. There are other books that are available, and I must admit they're not as clear as Art Scroll. There's a sefer called Perish Chai on Shabbos. There's another something else I found online. It just really was a lot more confusing. So I went down and I did the Art Scroll for you guys, or for me. Okay. So at any rate, Shmuel says that what they were done b'yaseidot. Okay, so the Gemara says now Tan Rabbanan. Then we have a brisa that says as follows: Krashim milamata. This is the discussion between the two approaches of what the krashim were. Krashim milamata ovyan amo milamala kolam v'holchim ha'ketzba. There are two opinions in this brisa that we're going to read about how the krashim were built. The first one is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. His name will come up in the line number 4. But one opinion says that the krashim, when on the bottom, were 1 by 1.5 across, and 10, of course, 10 tall. On the bottom, the thickness was 1, and the other side was by 1.5. And then when you went up, they came to a point, at ketzba, the thinness of a finger, as it says in Shmos, in discussing what the krashim were, Yu tamim al rosho. They will come to the edge on the top of it. And it says, and later on it says in Sefer Yoshua, Hu Omer Lahalan Omer, Tamu Nichrasu, that somehow Tamu, the Tamim does not mean complete, but Tamim means ended. So the way that Rabbi Yehuda is understanding this pasuk, you Tamim al Rosho, is not that they're going to become complete until their top, but it's going to be their end in the point at the Rosh at the top. As it says, Tamu Nichrasu, they will be ended, they'll be cut off. This is in Sefer Yoshua. I think it's talking about the enemies of Klal Yisrael, Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, the krashim looked like this picture. They were standing up when they were vertical, and they came to a point. And we don't really have a good picture yet. And then who says that? Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Nechem Yomer Keshem Shemalamata Ovyon Ama Kach Milamalan Ovyon Ama. Says Rabbi Nechem, the other second opinion, which is the opinion that you normally see in all the pictures in the Chumashim about how the Mishkan was built. There was 1 Amma down on the bottom and 1 Amma up on top. It really was considered completely as thick from bottom to top. How do you know? As it says Yachdav. It says in the pasuk Yachdav. They're together. So, which means that they're going to be together the same way. In other words, they're going to be completely put together. Not that they're going to come to a point, but the Yachdav means that they're actually going to be put together the same way on the bottom, the same way on the top. So Yachdav. So the Gemara says Vaksiv Tamim, doesn't say Tamim according to Rabbi Yehuda. He says Tamim does not mean complete, but Tamim means it's cut down to come to a point, to Rosho. So the Gemara says no, Rabbi Nechemia learns the word Tamim for something else. Hahud the Leisa Shleimim. V'lo lahave d'nistra. That tells me that the boards have to be complete and they can't be put together one piece after another. So in other words, the boards themselves have to be made from one tree, one piece of wood, not shticklich that are going to be nailed together or soldered, not soldered, but put together with sockets or glued or something. They have to be one piece from top to bottom. That's what tamim means. So Rabbi Nechemia says tamim means complete, one piece. Rabbi Yehuda says tamim means from the term as tamu, kalu, nichrasu. This comes to an end. It is cut down, which means it's cut down and comes to a point. Fundamental machlokas about between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nechemia, how the krashim were built. And let's see, the Gemara is going to just try to deal with the psukim. So what does it mean? The Tamu ha lesu shleimim v'lo lesu d'nistra. D'nistra means to be pieces. So the Gemara says v'idach nam yoksiv yachdav. Doesn't say yachdav, and yachdav means that they're going to be total. So the Gemara says hahud lo l'shluchfinhu me'adadi. That tells me that they're not going to stick out one from the other. In other words, when they were finished, they had to be all yachdav. Means not that they had to be the same way tight yachdav all the way up straight. It means each one next to the other had to fit in. Had to look like they were planed down equally. Not that one was sticking out this way and one was sticking out this way. They actually a perfect finished on the planks of wood that were for the krashim. So that's what he says means yachdav. And so bishlama. Okay, so the Gemara is now going to deal with one final issue about the krashim, and then we'll be able to get up to the 2 dots, and we'll leave the top of the Mishkan for the next week. But the Gemara is going to deal with one basic issue, and this picture is actually going to help us understand this. You see this picture, the one on the bottom? I'm not sure where it is in the art scroll. You guys have this picture? So this is the way. This is the Mishkan. This is what your Mishkan looked like. It's not all the way down, but you had 3 walls of the Mishkan. The back wall was where the whole Kodesh Kodashim was, and you had 2 side walls. So the 2 side walls come, and if you count across, it's actually going to be considered 9 amos in between the thickness of the walls, or you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You have 6 boards here, each of which is 1.5. This is 1.5 this way. This row is going to be 1s. This way is going to be thickness is 1.5. 6 of these boards makes 1.5, makes 9. Mm-hmm. We know that it's really supposed to be a little bit. It's supposed to be longer in the middle. It's supposed to be, I guess, 10 in the middle. So how does it work out? So they had the end boards were just put in place. You assume they would be put in place to fill off and square off the ends. So this is what the Torah says, that on the far end of the Mishkan, you're going to have Shisha Krashim, six of these Krashim, and then what did you do for the end? So you had one in each end to square it off.
Is the one same size, 1.5 by 1?
I think it's one.
This doesn't make sense then.
Right, it looks like it's 1.5 by 1.5.
Yeah, but then it would be...
it's 1.5 by 1.
It would be 10 on the inside, 2 halves.
It would be 10 on the inside?
Well, if you have 1.5.
I don't know, I'm not sure.
Well, if you have 1.5, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. What's that? 8 times 1.5 is 8, 12. 12 minus... Yeah, 12 minus, and the thickness is 1. 2 1s, you get 10. So something must be, the corner one must have been 1 by 1, or I don't know.
So I believe that what you have is on the sides of the ends is 1 across, or it's maybe a thickness of 1, I should say, and therefore what you have is 9 and another half, and on the other side you have another half put in. So I believe, I'm not sure exactly how to make it work, but this is going to be 9, and we know that this is supposed to be 10, so they had another half put in here, another half put in,
so it's 10.
because you have another, right, because this one is also 1.5, of which half is going to be covering the airspace, and the other one at the end is going to be back and be next to the next wall. Okay, so that's just trying to make sense of this. So this is easy to figure out. So the Gemara says, if you assume that the krashim are vertically like this, they're top and they're equal to 1 amma on the bottom, 1 amma. 1 amma by 1.5 by 1.5 by 1 amma by 1.5 on the bottom. So the Gemara says as follows. Let me go back to this here. So if you work with the assumption, which is the assumption of Rabbi Nechemia, that the krashim, whereas we always thought they were straight up and down boards of 1.5 by 1 amma up to 10 ammas high. This is what the pasuk says. You're going to have shisha krashim, which are 1.5 amos on the far end wall. There are 2 krashim that are put into the mekutzos, into the edges. So what do we say? That the edge, I'm not sure how to make the words work here, that the addition of one will fit into the missing part of the other one. So it's straight up. So in other words, I have one. I just need to put another rectangular board into this corner. So that's easy. So I understand what the Torah is trying to say, that I have 6 krashim across, each 1.5, and I need to put 1 on each end to fill up the gap that would be missing, because it's going to be not completely across. That's easy. However, here's the however, says the Gemara. I'm going to go to the next page, the back side of this, and this is the one that's on the, which am I doing? This is the one on the right, on the left, excuse me. If on the other hand, this one here. If on the other hand, I'm dealing with the krashim, and the krashim are not straight up and down, but what are they? They're more like arrowheads, right? They're more like lean-tos. They're more like they come to a point. So how am I going to put something into a corner and have it fit into it? Because if it leans one way, it's going to stick out on the other way. If I have 2 sides of the walls of the Mishkan, if they're straight up and down, I understand why I need to put the makeup piece. But each side is leaning in. This almost looks like the side of the building at the Ram.
Okay. One side is straight.
No side is straight. No side is straight.
Over here, the picture shows like one side is straight and one side is on an angle.
Correct. So each side...
So it depends which way you put it.
So each side, think of it like this. Each side is coming like this. Each kerish is like this. Straight up on one side and coming to the other. So one wall comes like this. One wall comes like this, right? And then the back end, what's the back end look like? The back end is going to be, I can't do this, straight and coming pointed like this. So how do I have a straight point at the end? How do I ever have this kind of edge, yakasayim yama, the mikutzot, to put into the corners that are going to be able to fit into it? Because if I normally think that I'm putting something that's flat on one side and pointed on one side, it's not going to fit into a corner. I'm not sure how to make this.
See, looks like here, this drawing, they're putting the straight side on the inside,
Right. No,
the slanted side on the outside.
They're both actually slanted. They're both slanted in. This side is slanted and this side is slanted in. But when they put the edge...
The inside is straight. On the inside, it's straight. You don't see the inside.
I don't think so.
Because one side has to be straight. The picture shows.
So what they're trying to show you, when you put up the corner one,
you get overlap.
and the corner one, you're going to have an overlap. It's going to stick out because each of these things is straight on one side and pointed on the other.
Right.
How can you put a corner piece if it's straight on one side and pointed on one side, when on either side you've got pointed and pointed?
Yeah, you can.
So something is not going to work out. So the Gemara says, how can this possibly be according to this opinion? The Gemara's answer is going to be, the obvious answer is that the corner pieces were cut in on both two sides.
Like on the second picture.
Like on the second picture. I'm not sure if you can really tell from the second picture, but each of them have been cut down on both sides. So this side is like this side is like this. The corner piece is going to be cut down on this side and on this side. It's narrow on top on two different sides. Whereas each wall is normally planed in on one side, and in the corner ones it's going to be planed in on two sides. That's just simply the simple way to make it work. So let's just do that because that's just the logistics of how to make it work. So what does that mean? So we don't understand if they're vertical and they make sense. However, how can it make sense? Aisle means to go out, and nafik means to go in, or aisle is actually to go in, and nafik is to go out. One side will go in and fit in, but the other side will stick out because it's not planed on one side. So the Gemara answers, the Gemara says, the shafalei kiturian, that they actually planed them down, they made them thin like a mountain. A mountain doesn't come on one side. A mountain is not planed on one side. Mountain is planed on two different sides, or many sides. So these krashim that were in the end, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, were planed on two sides to be able to fit in. It means they were very narrow on both sides. That's how the pieces can make sense and work out itself. Okay? And that's really about pretty much as much time as we have. That'll take us really to a good place where we can stop, and we can pick up at the two dots next time. And the two dots next time, I really want to be able to get up at least to the two dots on the upside Tzetzim and Aleph, so we can. The next piece of Gemara, by the way, is we're going to need this sheet once again. It's going to deal with. I'll just tell you what the trailer is for next week. The next thing is going to talk about the coverings on the Mishkan. If you assume that each of the krashim stood up, the coverings of the Mishkan had to go an extra amma on the top. If they were planed, the coverings on the Mishkan had one or two less ammas to go across because they reached over the Mishkan.
Oh,
and then they hung down straight because they flipped down on an angle.
Okay.
So the next piece of the Gemara is going through the different coverings on the Mishkan, which is nice, but it's trying to make it work according to two different sheets, whether they're vertical or whether they're planed down on one side. Okay, and then we got to clean up one piece about the galot, and then you'll have it there. Okay, thank you all for coming out on Canada Day. Shukov to everybody.